There's one more handy thing I want to show you, and that is how to change how your class is represented when it gets printed out. So let's say you make a new class. Let's say we make a class called student. And our student, when we create our student, should have, well, what do you think? What do you think a student should have? A student certainly needs a name. I think an ID would be a good thing to have. Student ID, call it SID. And then we can also have a grade book. So we'll definitely make self.name equal name, self.sid equals SID. And before I go on here, I just want to point out these parameters for the constructor can be the same as the instance variable name that you're creating here, instance attribute to be precise, but it doesn't have to be. Whenever you see, like, the way you reference an instance attribute is with self dot and then something. Whenever you have a variable on its own, then you're referencing like a variable in the local frame of this function when it's being executed. And so I could just call this dog if I wanted to. I could call this banana. But that isn't very clear. So it's pretty common to have the parameters match. If you're setting these parameters directly as attributes in the constructor, it's common to have them match just for readability, but you don't have to. That's not a rule. Maybe something else that we want to do here is keep track of a grade book. So self.grades, the list. And here we have a student, and I'm going to make a few students here to show you. So student 1 is going to be, really I should write this out. Student 1 is a student whose name is Jonathan. His ID is going to be 7483921. Student 2 equals student Dindu. Gonna have a different ID. And I'll make one more student, student 3. Tyler with a name like that. Now, maybe we'll want to add these to a list. Let's say we have our roster is going to be student 1, student 2, student 3. Now you might want to print out what your roster is to show someone, to tell someone about who's in your class. Let's try that and see what happens. We'll print out roster. Main.py. Oh, so it prints out clearly a list. We have brackets on either end. And then we have these comma separated elements in our list. But what got printed? So this says main.studentObject at 0x7f63 EC2865B0. And whoops, same thing for these other two items. So this isn't very readable, and this is maybe a bit frustrating when you're trying to debug your code and print out what's in a roster, and then you get these objects. They don't mean much. So the reason this happens is, look at what happens if I print just one of our students. So this tells us that this is a student object located at this location in memory. You'll learn more about how these locations in memory are actually represented in a computer architecture class that you'll take further on in your computer science education. But the important thing to know is that this is how, like, we can actually tell that these are distinct objects, is by checking that their location is different. So you can see, yeah, these look very similar, but 7FE11D2EA, the last three here, 5BO and 1FO, you can see that these are two different objects. If I print student 1 twice, you'll see that their address is the same, because it's the same object. But there should be a better way to print out your student and see what, like, a better way to represent your student as a string. I mentioned this before, but these underscore methods are special. They're built in. And there's a couple of other ones that are built into Python. In fact, looks like we're not going to see it here. One special one is called repr. Underscore repr. And it doesn't take any parameters beyond just self, which we have to have. And what it does is whatever this returns is how we represent, which is what repr is short for, represent our object with a string. So repr is a method that returns a string that's used to represent our object when we want to go print our object. And so if you ever want to have your objects make more sense when they're printed out, you can create a repr method just like this, underscore, underscore, repr, underscore, underscore, and return the string that you want to be returned. So perhaps what I'm going to return is return bracket like this, format self.name, self.sid. And this string formatting will replace these first braces with the first thing and these second braces with the second thing. Now if I go and I print out a student, if we go and print out a student, you can see it prints Jonathan, comma, and Jonathan's ID. And if I print out the whole roster, it prints Jonathan 7483921, Dindu 9437213, and Tyler 7389543. And I can print this a different way even. I could, maybe it's a little clearer if I put it like this. Maybe with a dash in between. Maybe this will look nice. Yeah. And this is because when you go to print out a list, what Python does is it actually just prints an open bracket, and then it prints the representation, the string representation of each object in that list. So that's why before, when we didn't have this, if I comment this out, the representation of each item was just this long string with a memory address, because Python can't guess for you how to represent the item. But as soon as we implement this repr method on any class, then if you try to print out that class, it'll print the student name, then the name and the ID, because you specified that string exactly here. Notice it doesn't include grades because you didn't specify grades, that you want that to be in the representation. Now that's a handy trick you know that'll help you write cleaner code.